Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I am super excited today. I have a lovely guest on the show. Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Kate. It's lovely to be here and talking about my very, very most favourite subject in the world.
Well, we were just talking before we started recording about how sort of the flavor of the month, talking about hormones, female hormones, and sort of perimenopause and menopause has been recently. And I think there is a lot of potentially misinformation out there, but also maybe not a lot of information for women. So it's going to be great to dive into that today. But before we do, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Right. I have an unusual mix of mainstream medicine, including some obstetric training. I've delivered over 1,000 babies in my career. But about 25 years ago, I also stepped into that interesting arena called integrative medicine. So I combine the best of both worlds. And my focus for the last 30 years has been quite firmly on women's health, and that flows to women's hormonal health, because you can't separate women's health from their hormones. We're very complex little beasts.
Yes, I agree. But I think, recently, probably in the last maybe 5 years, there's been more of a push to support women and their hormones. I think we're talking about it more than ever. But if there's a listener sort of listening in, what do you want women to know about their hormones?
I think your hormones are always a barometer on the general health of your body. So don't ignore those little signs that things are not quite right or in balance, because they can be fixed and rebalanced, and that can save you a whole pile of grief, perhaps a decade or two down the track, when you're hitting those vulnerable change periods like perimenopause and menopause. And I think women are incredibly resilient, and we tend to put up with a lot. And sometimes that means going to a doctor, talking about your hormones and how you're feeling. And sometimes the doctor's not appreciating how significant those hormonal symptoms are and not giving you a pathway, a clear pathway forward on how to fix it.
And if somebody, is thinking about, well, yeah, I think I am having some hormonal symptoms, but how do I know the difference between just getting a random headache or it being related back to my menstrual cycle?
I think one of the really good tools to use for answering exactly that question is to keep a hormonal journal. And it doesn't have to be a novel, but just a daily, how are you feeling? What are your hormones doing? Are there any changes that weren't there last week? And you then start to build up a picture of whether the symptoms are related to your hormones, or whether they're related to something as simple as, I just didn't have my coffee that morning. So there are a lot of things that play there. And when we're talking about symptoms that come and go, a journal can really help you decide whether it's related to your hormones, or there are other things in your lifestyle that you need to look at and address.
I love that suggestion. And I myself use one of the tracking apps for my cycle just to, see what stage of the cycle I'm in and all the rest of it. And I think that's, if people can, even track their cycle, that can be very helpful as well.
Absolutely. I'm from an era before the internet gave us all these amazing tools online. So I tend to get down and write my thoughts and feelings and symptoms out. But I think it's incredible that we're able to do that. In our fast-paced world, we can still keep an eye on those things that are really important for us to journal, to record, so that it can help a doctor work out whether it's a hormonal problem or not, if it gets to that stage where you think you need professional advice on what's happening with your body.
Mm. And I know I've had people reach out to me as well, and I've had friends that have had potentially some issues happening with their hormones, and they have been to the doctor and they have been brushed off. And, you're busy, you've got kids, you're in sort of midlife, just try and get a bit more sleep and maybe try to stress less and you'll be fine. So, what advice do you have for those sort of women that have maybe experienced that as well?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it is really common for that to happen. And our health system isn't really set up to deep dive into female hormones and the imbalance of them. we're so busy as medical doctors treating the next cough, cold, flu, heart attack, stroke, injury, that taking time out to look at the very complex issue of women's hormones, regardless of her age, is probably not something that you're going to find in a mainstream medical GP's office. So what I suggest women do is they look for a doctor who perhaps has a special interest in women's health. And often those doctors will have a lovely website where they can actually do a little bit of pre-checking to make sure that that person is the right person for you. But we shouldn't forget our naturopathic communities. Naturopaths are amazing, amazing at putting your hormones and your body back into balance. And it's a role that doctors just can't fill due to the constraints and the pressure to treat people who are sick. So I think you look for the right health practitioner to suit your personality and your problems, and that may well be a naturopath.
Well, I myself, after having kids, my cycle was a little bit, out of whack. I had some stresses going on, and I saw a naturopath, and I also saw a Chinese medicine doctor, and drank some horrible Chinese herbs, but and had some acupuncture as well, and it really helped. It helped a lot, as disgusting as some of those herbs may be. But I think that you bring up a great point that there's lots of other avenues, whether it's naturopathy or a Chinese medicine doctor or acupuncture. There are alternative medicine out there that can support women during this time too.
I think the other really important take-home message here is that when you look at the evidence of, for example, Chinese medicine, a TCM practitioner, they are actually better at turning down the symptoms of polycystic ovarian syndrome than mainstream medical doctors are. So I think we underestimate how powerful these treatment modalities are that don't fit into our paradigm of mainstream medicine in Australia. But just because they don't fit our narrow view of how we have to act to be well, it doesn't mean that there's not a lot of evidence there that you can find to say that's a good pathway if you've got hormonal imbalance, and it's been proven to work. And I'm in awe of Chinese medicine practitioners.
Well, again, another good point is there is a lot of research out there, and sometimes it can be a little bit hard to, sort of cipher through what may be good and what may be not. But that's where if you have some, practitioners, in your sort of toolkit that you can reach out to, or friends that have seen practitioners and that as well, you can usually, find someone that's right for you.
Yeah, I think the most important thing in Australia is that the regulatory bodies that cover the alternative health practitioners are the same regulatory bodies that control doctors. And I always recommend that if somebody is looking for a TCM practitioner, a Chinese doctor, or a naturopath, to look and make sure that they are registered with APRA, because that basically gets away from choosing a practitioner who may have done a week's course on naturopathy and now have set out their shingle and said, I can fix everything from your ingrown toenail to your cancer. So I think you have to be very savvy about who you choose to be on your health team. But in my world, having a naturopath on your health team and an acupuncturist, and in my case, they are also a TCM practitioner, and a doctor, that's looking at having all your bases covered. So I wouldn't be going off to my GP to look at my hormones, for example. It's just not in their lane. But if you choose the right practitioner to talk about your problems, you will get better results.
And when it comes to, lifestyle choices and habits, how much do they either hinder or help our hormonal health?
I've done a lot of study in the last 10 years on genetics, and I have actually got it's a very wheelbarrow name, but I've got a postgraduate certificate in translational nutrigenomics. And essentially what that means is how what you do with your life and what you eat, what food you eat, talks to your genes to either support wellness or perhaps hinder you. And one of the things that we know from research is that your ability to lead a long and healthy life is 75% dependent on how you choose to live your life. 25% of your genes plays a part, but that's actually not that much. So if you're going to be leading a good life, if you want to live a lot longer in health, then don't rely on your genes to do the job. You've got far more control of your outcomes, your health outcomes, than you really realize. And the thing that really comes home to me is that it's actually not that hard to do, but you've actually got to commit to finding information, getting knowledge, and then putting different habits in practice every day that come from you. Nourishment, what you choose to put on your dinner plate, how you choose to have a relationship or not with alcohol, how you guard your sleep, all of those foundations of wellness, that's where longevity lays. It's never going to lay in a pill, and it's never going to be found in a particular supplement that would probably cost you several $100s a month to take, and really have not got any long-term studies to say that they're going to deliver an extra decade of good quality life. So get down to the basics and stick to things that have been proven to support hormones and proven to support healthy lifespan, which is what longevity is all about. And in order to do that, all you have to do is to look at communities in the world that actually do that and have been doing it for generations. We've got those longevity experiments that are right on our doorstep. And we tend to ignore it because it's things that are really boring, like, oh, I've got to eat more vegetables, I've got to move my body, I've got to, minimize my alcohol. We don't want to hear that that's how we live longer. But the bottom line is, if you don't do that, you won't.
Well, you bring up a really good point, and I think it's very empowering that if we know that 75% of what we do influences our health, that's really powerful knowledge that we can then make big changes to help prevent. We may have a history of cancer in our family or heart disease, which is terrible, but we're not. It's not a sentence. Essentially, we can change the outcome if we change our lifestyle habits.
Correct. You're not sitting on a genetic time bomb. And it's really important to know, this is my passion, to get the information out there on such simple things that can absolutely change the course of your life in a decade from now. And when I've been researching for a book that I'm in the process of getting to the editor at the end of this week, and it's on hormonal journey, a woman's hormonal journey from puberty through to what I call the age of wisdom. Forget postmenopause, it's the age of wisdom, and how you can support that journey to be healthy at the final phase that you enter into after menopause. And I'm writing that book with my dear colleague and friend Sharon Kolkka. One of the things that I underestimated was the power of these foods that we call phytoestrogens. They're foods that talk directly to our hormone balancing biochemistry. And something as simple as having 10 grams of flax seeds every day can dramatically alter your risk of getting breast cancer in a decade or two. And it's so easy to do it if you know that information. You just have your fresh flaxseed, either frozen or in the fridge, and you throw them onto your salads or you throw them into a smoothie every day. But if you don't know how powerful they are, you wouldn't even think to actually do that. So I think that's the information that I think needs to get out there, because it's not dramatically changing your lifestyle and living like a monk and never having alcohol. It's knowing how tight your lifestyle boundaries are and how much give you have to break those boundaries and not pay a price in health. And for people, and for women particularly, who look at their family history and see breast cancer scattered all over it, their lifestyle boundaries for playing outside of those healthy lifestyle habits is smaller. But it doesn't mean that they can't enjoy a celebratory red wine when they want to, just not every day and probably not every week. So I think that's the information that I want to get out, and that's going to be covered certainly in the menopause retreat that I'm running in August. I think it's the 18th of August. These little things that women need to know, because it's so easy to do that. Put on their shopping list flaxseed oil, put on their shopping list the other phytoestrogen foods that alter the breast situation. Alfalfa sprouts, throw them on top of the salad that you normally create for your your family, and all of a sudden you have a powerful phytochemical working in your favor to support and protect your breasts. So those sorts of things are important to get out there, and they're underestimated. People don't appreciate how in awe of food I am as a powerful supporter of wellness, but it can also allow you to dodge some health bullets that are wired into your genetics.
Well, food, is super powerful in the sense that majority of us are eating probably 3 meals a day or 2 meals a day. So it's something that we're regularly intaking constantly. We may only exercise once every couple of days, or ideally once a day. But when it comes to food, it's something that we're constantly having to put into our body. And what we eat, builds our cells and our muscles, and everything in the body. So it makes sense that if you're putting good food in, then we're going to get good results. But if we're eating foods that are maybe, processed or higher in seed oils or sugars and things, that our health, may be a reflection of that as well.
Yeah, and I think this is it. We tend to get sucked into a good marketing campaign as well. And I think that the internet has offered the opportunity for women and men to actually do their own research. But you can sometimes get bogged down in the hype of the marketing of a certain food or a certain product, and overestimate how good that particular food was for you or is for you. And one of the classics was the push to change to margarine away from the demon of butter way back in the 1990s and 2000s. And it was probably the worst marketing health message that ever came out into our population, because it has killed a lot of people. When you change to those seed oils, those margarines that are not natural foods, you may actually get to the stage where your figures on a doctor's report card, your cholesterol levels lower. And everybody thinks, gosh, that margarine that you're eating has made an amazing difference to your cholesterol because it's dropped down from 6 to 4. But we've got to keep our eye on the ball, because the eye on the ball, the end point is not how those figures change on a piece of paper. It's whether that particular choice to eat margarine has actually made a difference to us living or dying of heart disease. And when you look at the figures that came out from an amazing researcher called Chris Ramsden, it was a disaster for a generation, because not only did the omega-6 based margarines not stop you from having a heart attack, they actually caused more than the people who continued to quietly enjoy a beautiful natural food like butter. So it's basically trying to not get sucked into some really good marketing campaigns out there, whether it come from your general population or your health doctor, because we get it wrong sometimes too. It's a matter of just taking a step back and thinking, does it pass the rule of common sense? And is it based on something that humans have fiddled with that used to exist in nature? And I think that can keep you out of a lot of trouble. If you only eat food that comes out of the ground and onto your plate as nature provided, that very step is going to allow you to live a healthier and longer life.
And, I'm always on the podcast talking about, leaning into our whole foods, plant-based and all the rest of it. And I know that last year you did some traveling over in Europe, and you were studying the Mediterranean diet, quite extensively. So can you share a little bit of that with our listeners as well?
Yes, I was very fortunate to be able to travel to the south of France, to a little village called Villefranche-sur-Mer, and it's nestled between Nice and Monaco, so on the Côte d'Azur, a beautiful area. And even though it's not technically a blue zone, and blue zones in the world are areas where the community live an incredibly long and healthy life, the type of choices that the community in this tiny little village make allows their people, their population, to live well and to live independently into their 80s, 90s and beyond. So I have a special affinity for that particular village. It must have been a past life, but I went there last year with the specific intention to live a life as a blue zone person, to reduce my stress, have more plant-based food. Because it's on the sea, I could eat a lot of seafood. And in fact, I think for the 12 weeks that I was there, I only had about 6 meals that weren't from the sea. And what I did before I went was to check my DNA M age, the age of my cells, which you can do in a nifty little genetic test that comes out of a group in Singapore. So I spat and I took that genetic test before I left, and then immediately on return, I spat and did my before and after. And I'm not going to tell you what the results were, but I was incredibly impressed with my ability to turn back my biological age in that short period of time, where in fact I actually drank a little bit more alcohol than I normally do at home. And one of the many lessons that particular 12-week journey gave me was that you don't have to exclude the things that you really love in order to live a healthy life. You've just got to put them in perspective and know where your boundaries are. And alcohol is one that I think gets a lot of pushback from our community, and you've probably struck that as well in your practice, Kate, where you start talking about alcohol and it's almost like there's this wall come up between you and your person. And it's a matter of trying to work around that and to get out of the concept that as long as I don't drink more than my girlfriends, or as long as I don't drink more than my doctor, I'm okay with my relationship with alcohol. So I think that was one of the lessons that I got from my stay over there. But I also had the opportunity to eat really readily available and easy to access natural foods that came from the local region. And I think that was also a part of why my biological age got wound back quite a few years with that.
Mm. Well, you bring up a good point about context, the context of when we may be having certain foods or alcohol. And I think that has a big effect too on how we not only digest food, but then how we process it as well.
Exactly right. And I think what we've done is we've looked at alcohol as the first, my stress management tool of choice. A lot of women will come home and the first thing they'll do is pour themselves a glass of wine, often because they're a little bit thirsty. And a glass of water would have been a really good first step, because sometimes that slows the wine down as well. But it's not the best stress management tool you can use. But unless you've been taught other ways of dealing with pressure, that's all you've got. And it's not something that we teach in primary school or high school, how to deal with stress. We just dump more stress on and expect our human bodies to deal with it. But stress is probably the most significant saboteur of hormonal wellness. It'll mess with your hormones if you're a young woman, and it will mess with your perimenopause. It will send you into a perimenopausal hell, and it will make the transition through menopause a whole pile harder. So getting a handle on your stress is probably the most important thing. It's probably the top wellness pillar if we're looking at hormonal health.
And I think, it's probably one area too that a lot of women underestimate, because they're used to dealing with quite a high load of stress, and whether or not that's emotional or physical or, coming from our food, and causing stress within our body. I think we think we can deal with a lot of that. And a lot of people I know in my practice that I speak to are like, "Oh, I'm not stressed. I'm fine. That stress is not an issue." And it's really when we start to, peel back the layers and start going through things that they're like, "Oh, yes, I guess there is quite a lot of stress there. I've just kind of gotten used to being able to deal with it," essentially.
Yeah. It's a little bit like putting the frog in a cold water and allowing it to heat up slowly. You don't realize that it's really hot inside and you need to get out. And I think sometimes what happens to women is they basically break down, and their ability to stretch their coping mechanisms just isn't there anymore, and it breaks. And that's when you see people who perhaps break down over, the butter being left out of the fridge overnight, where it's not the butter, it's the accumulation of stress over weeks, months and years that led to that being just the last thing that they could cope with. So I think we've got an incredible ability to cope with stress, but we've also got an extra stress that men don't have, and that's our hormones. And particularly in young women, it's the hormones that change every week of every menstrual month that our bodies have to deal with and cope with, that then puts a pressure on our system to, to deal with yet another stress. And then there's the vicious cycle. If your hormones aren't working well, that puts a physiological stress on your body, and that adds to the psychological stress that you might be dealing with. And what happens in perimenopause particularly is it's sort of like a perfect storm brewing. You've got to the 40s where you're getting older as a woman, and there's some issues of having to come to terms with that. Your kids are probably, if you've had them at that really nasty teenager era, which you've then got to deal with. You've got a partner who may or may not be having the same hormonal problems as you, or dealing with work issues. And then you've got menopause coming there. And I think that we enter perimenopause with a lot of burden on ourselves that then makes that passage through that hormonal phase even harder for us. And if you go to a doctor and you talk to a doctor about symptoms of the perimenopause, what a doctor may hear in their mind is, this woman thinks she's going through menopause. Let's do a hormone test. Your hormone tests come back with estrogen still buffering away like it would in your 20s. And the message from the practice nurse is, no, your hormones are perfect. And they're not, because the question that the woman was asking was not the question that the doctor answered. They may not be going through menopause, but their hormones are certainly not balanced. And that's one of those scenarios where I think a naturopath who has time to put aside to listen to a woman's hormonal story can actually get to the root of the problem a lot quicker and a lot more often than, again, a very busy doctor who only hears menopause or no menopause and not balance as a part of the conversation in the waiting room, in the office.
Mm. And I think it's important too that, the doctor may do a blood test and, check your estrogen and go, oh, yeah, it's fine. But that is a snapshot on that one day in that month. And a week later, it could be completely different depending on what stage you are in your cycle too.
Exactly right. And that's where I think a doctor, and an integrative doctor, I think is probably the best choice, who knows that the right time to take hormonal bloods is not whenever you feel like it's convenient, but there is specific times in a menstrual cycle where you get different information out of blood tests, and you need to know that in order to basically provide women with information that they can act on. But the other thing is that doctors tend to completely ignore the fact that there's two fertility hormones. One's called estrogen, we always talk about that, but the other one is progesterone, and it's probably even more important, much more important, as we move through our perimenopausal phase. And the most important information that I think we've got in our hormonal book is the interplay between thyroid hormones and progesterone, and how that can make a woman's metabolic support really struggle and slow down at a time when she really, really, really needs it to raise up and support her. So there's a lot of interplay between hormones, and it all comes to a perfect storm at perimenopause. It's an incredibly important time in a woman's life, because if she gets that bit right, those decades between about 40 and 50, she can really set herself up for an exceptionally healthy postmenopausal life into the age of wisdom, where bones are healthy and fine, mood's great, everything is in balance. And even though hormones are lower once you move through the menopause, they're not zero. They buffer up enough to keep us going until we're in our 90s, and hopefully a healthy 90.
Mm. And, I would be remiss if we didn't touch on HRT, because I feel like that has sort of come into the media quite a bit recently, and a lot of the guidelines potentially around HRT are changing, and a lot of the experts now are suggesting that maybe it's better to start HRT in perimenopause when there are some already symptoms starting to come through. So can you chat a little bit about that as well?
It's a landmine, but if you follow the evidence, it's actually quite, there's a clear path through the quagmire, if I can put it like that. The first point I want to make is that if you are well, then that probably means that your hormones are balanced. And when we're looking at hormone replacement therapy, whether it be estrogen, progesterone, or testosterone, they will only benefit women who are low in those hormones, because more of a good thing is not better. So the blanket idea, and I hear that from my mainstream medical colleagues, is put every woman on menopausal replacement therapy when they go through menopause, because we're going to reduce their risk of dementia, because that's the new thing. And my pushback on that is, yes, the evidence is there that there is a reduced risk of dementia if women in that window of about 12 months going through menopause starts HRT. But did they really need it? Was it the right choice for them? And are their hormones buffered enough and healthy enough to see them through that change without causing any symptoms and without any risk of cognitive decline into the future? And so I think what we have here is almost like a fear-based push to look at hormone replacement, menopause replacement. And I can see that women are jumping on that really, really quickly. In the perimenopause, at the beginning of that whole process, estrogen is not a problem. You've got bucket loads of estrogen and sometimes too much. But it's the progesterone. It's almost like a reverse of puberty. The progesterone starts to falter, and that is a supportive hormone for women. And if we're going to be looking at hormone replacement in perimenopause, a bioidentical progesterone is the right fit for a lot of perimenopausal women. But they don't need estrogen because their estrogen levels are in their hundreds. And then that's not broken. When we get through to the menopause, so both estrogen and progesterone have dropped to lower levels, there is still an argument that not every woman needs to go on to menopausal replacement therapy. And I think that as a medical doctor, do I prescribe HRT? Yes, but I would prescribe it probably once or twice a year. And I've got a lot of menopausal women who come to see me. So there are some women who will reap the benefit, but not everyone. And I think it's important for you to do a risk-benefit analysis and to make a decision on whether you, as a unique individual, really needs to have that medical support to go through a natural process. And it's not an easy question when you're being bombarded by these fear messages about you're going to get dementia if you don't take this tablet. And it's not true.
Mm. And I think too, the other side of that is the lifestyle piece, and that what we can support, with our hormones through diet and lifestyle. And sometimes people may, see in the media about HRT before they've explored that sort of avenue of changing things in diet and lifestyle. And you can get some amazing results by doing that first before even potentially looking into HRT.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely right. And I think this is where, again, our society has been almost conditioned to look for a quick fix. And if a quick fix comes in a pill that you can swallow once a day, and then you don't have to worry about all the other things that are wrong with your life, that's very tempting for a lot of women. But it's not going to give you longevity. I can guarantee you that. If you haven't got all of the other basic health things in place, or your ducks lined up, a pill's not going to get you to where you want or where you imagine you will be in your 60s, 70s and 80s. You've got to do the work.
Mm. And speaking of longevity, I'm sure, most people listening in want to live, a very long life, but our quality of life with that longevity is very important too. And, I'm sure people have loved ones potentially that may, be in a nursing home, and they look at them and go, you know what, I don't want to be like that. So we've touched on some diet and lifestyle things, but what are some other things that we can maybe think about dialing in that's really going to change our quality of life if we're planning on, really increasing that longevity?
Yeah, I think as we age with women, our focus in exercise and movement changes. It's all about perhaps cardio and spin classes when you're younger. But as we get through to our 50s, we have to be a little bit more clever about what we choose to support our bodies to get through the next decade or two. And one of the things that I hate to have a conversation about is a woman, 48, 49, who's decided to take up marathon training as her preferred health option to get her through the next 2 decades in a great quality of life. And my mind, because I've had experience in that endurance sports arena, I actually looked after most of our endurance athletes who work and train on the Gold Coast way back when I was doing a more mainstream practice. And our incredible endurance athletes, our triathletes, they're all retired by their mid-30s because their bodies are worn out and their hormones are non-existent. And I think that women look at those beautiful, young, genetically blessed women and think, I'm going to be like them. And all endurance training does and marathon training does is basically push stress hormone pathways with overtraining. And that creates the very opposite of what a woman wants for health and well-being. So I think you have to look at what you do and how you move your body and just get back to a more natural life. Most of us, particularly if we've got Asian or European ancestry, are not genetically primed to thrive on endurance sports. And never were and never will be. But if you come from that sort of African subcontinent, that's where we find people who are genetically primed to do those long distance running and training, etc. But I think for women, it's about moving your body well and moving into the strength training arena, because building good muscles is going to keep you out of a nursing home. It's an incredible gift that we have for our older age. There's the ability to actually build good bones by building strong muscles, and that's a gift. But you can also dodge the diabetic bullet, because if you've got more muscles, bigger muscles, your muscles can help get the insulin and the blood sugar pathways under control. So I think we have to, as we age, look at how we move our bodies and how we exercise our bodies, because we can't do it in the same way as we could in our 20s and 30s, and neither should we.
Mm. And also, I think too, it's continuing to prioritize movement, because I think so many people, as they start to age and maybe retire, they sit down more, they don't exercise as much, and maybe they don't even have as much incidental movement happening. And it's all those, bending down to empty the dishwasher and, all of these sort of activities that do add up at the end of the day.
Yes, one of the things, and doctors do use this in their practice as well. I watch people get out of the chair in the waiting room, and I can tell by the way they get out of the chair, barring acute injury, as to whether they've got significant chronic disease or not. And one of the things that you can do simply at home is to get a stopwatch, 15 seconds, and count how many times you can get out of a chair up and down without actually needing to use your arms to help you. And you just benchmark, journal that number. How many times in 15 seconds did you manage to do that? Well, if you can do that again next month and next year, then you're keeping your muscles strong enough to support your ability to live independently. And something as simple as that is really an easy 15 seconds out of your day once every few months. Benchmarking and recognizing why it's changed, and then making tweaks to your lifestyle to improve it and get back to your benchmark.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, I work with a lot of older clients too in the studio setting, and even just balance and sitting to stand is one of the main things that we work on a lot, because a lot of people do have to use their arms to get up, or their balance isn't very good when they stand up. So a very simple thing to practice, but it can have profound effects for sure.
Yeah, exactly right. And one of the things that can tell a doctor whether or not you're in danger of cognitive decline is whether or not you can stand on one leg for 15 seconds as well. And you have to practice it. And you have to realize the amazing neural connections between your muscles, your brain, your balance that has to be working well in order for you to stand on one leg for 15 seconds. But we should be able to do that when we're in our 80s. But we can't if we don't benchmark our ability to do that when we're in our 50s or 60s, and then make sure that we're still able to do that as we move through into the next year of our life.
Mm. And how much does community play a part when it comes to healthy aging as well?
If you look at some of the common themes that tie together all of the blue zones that are across the world. Greece, Okinawa in Japan, Loma Linda, which is a community, a Seventh-day Adventist community in the US. They eat different diets. They move a little bit differently, but one of the key elements is that they have a very strong social bond with their community. And that can come through, generations of living in the same village, but it can also come with a shared faith or shared common values. And don't underestimate how exceptionally important that is to our living a long and healthy life. There was an amazing woman, her name's Marion Diamond, and she is a neurochemist, a neurobiologist, lecturer at Harvard. And she used a lot of rats in her studies on brain health. And one of the things she realized was that if she went into her lab and physically handled and patted her lab rats every single day, that within a very short period of time, the life expectancy of those rats went from 600 days to 900 days. And that was a benefit to her experiments, because she didn't have to replace all her lab rats as often. But that then allowed her to research that part of human connection and brain health and longevity. So as simple as hugging and getting that beautiful oxytocin love hormone hit, or having a beautiful family dinner together, or dinner with friends, or walk along the beach with your bestie, don't underestimate how much that feeds into longevity.
Well, I have heard too that if you are someone that is living alone, having a pet and being able to, touch that pet, hug that pet, can get that, oxytocin release, just the same as if you're hugging a person. So, it is a fantastic option for people just to get that touch, whether or not it's from an animal or a person.
Oh, absolutely. And again, the studies show that not only you get that oxytocin hit, but your pet does as well. They actually did some brain scans on dogs that were trained to stay very still. And when they put the scent of their owners into the MRI scan, the oxytocin section of their brain lit up like a beacon. So pets can feel that same love and connection to their humans as humans do to their pets. And I think that's an amazing gift as we get older, and perhaps we're losing our friends and family to the inevitable chronic diseases that we have.
But yeah, people are living longer and that as well. So it's one of those things that
Exactly.
if you can have that support from a person or an animal, that it's only going to help you in your longevity as well. Now, I know you're hosting a retreat at Gwinganna Lifestyle up in Queensland in August. Can you share a little bit more information about what that treat's about?
Right. It's a 4-day retreat. I think it's the 18th of August that it kicks off. And it's unusual in the sense that it is women only. So we're very focused on women's needs during that particular 5 days, 4 nights of the retreat. And for the first time in a long time, I'll actually be living on site as well. So there'll be the opportunity to connect with me at breakfast, on the morning walks, in the exercise component of the day, and also in the workshops that we'll be holding in our wellness centre. So, and the focus is basically on how you get through this hormonal journey from perimenopause through menopause and being well into the age of wisdom. So I'm really excited because it's the first time probably in a decade that we've done women's only retreats, and we stopped doing them because I just ran out of time. I was busy doing other stuff. But the interesting thing, way back in 2004, before Gwinganna officially opened, I ran the very first retreat there, which was called Women's Discovery. And we had 17 women because the actual accommodation could only host 17 at that stage. And it was an amazing experience. I'll always remember that as a very special memory in my association with Gwinganna.
Well, I think too, retreats are a way that, if you can't find the time in everyday life to set aside to, work out maybe what you need to do or what your next steps are, it's a way that you can set that time aside, connect with other women, connect with experts, and you're almost in a little bit of a bubble that then you can then create your plan on your next steps to go forward. And I think that's can be very empowering if you're sort of the type of person that doesn't know what to do or feels that they just don't have a lot of time to, work out what to do next.
I think it's a gift to yourself. And if you go under, then your whole family's stuffed. You need to look after yourself, self-care, which we don't do very well as women. And I can remember, this is going back way, way back to when my dear friend Sharon Kolkka was the general manager at Gwinganna, and I was burning the candle everywhere too much. I was very busy general practice. I was working full time. My kids were younger. And I'd reach a point where I'd say, that's it. I can't deal with this anymore. And I'd ring Sharon up and say, can you fit me in? Can I have a week up at your place? And she'd find a space for me at Gwinganna. And I would just become a guest for a full week. And I remember probably the second time I did that, I was 48, and I had been without a period for nearly 12 months. And on day 5 of me going, my period came back. And so I thought, well, that's an interesting observation. I'm obviously not quite through menopause. Anyway, so back to my very busy life, and then building up the stress again. And almost a year to the date, I made that same phone call again, went into my little Gwinganna cocoon, and had my second period in 12 months and my last ever. So my last 2 periods were both at Gwinganna, when I basically unplugged from the world and went back into a stress-less environment. And that I remember as an important take-home message for me as to how impactful stress can be, in that it can make my periods and basically catapult me into menopause probably before my body was biochemically programmed for it.
Well, it's really interesting you say that, because a client just said that to me the other day. She'd just been away for a few days. She just had a, highly stressful time. And she was like, I was literally like 1 or 2 days away from hitting 1 year without having my cycle. So I was like, oh, yep, that's it. I'm done. I will be in menopause. And then she said, while she was away, just a couple of days before that year was up, she's like, I got it again. I'm like, well, there you go.
It's a very good lesson that women can get from their bodies when they have to pay attention to that, because it's such an in-your-face message from your body to say, well, if you'd have done this 6 months ago, you probably wouldn't have had all those hot flushes for the last 5 months.
It's yes, the body's way of communicating, isn't it?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Now, we've covered a lot with, hormones and longevity today, but is there anything that we haven't touched on that you would like to share?
Um, I think, and again, it's quite, there's so many things that I want to share with women, but one of the most important things, I think, and it's such an easy thing to remedy, vitamin D is not well supported by our mainstream medical community. And it's one of those vitamins that doesn't get much press. A lot of people think that you only need vitamin D for your bone support, but if you don't support healthy, optimal vitamin D levels throughout your life, you're going to be knocking on the door of a lot of chronic diseases. So when we look at the evidence that says, okay, well, where's the sweet spot? Where's the optimal levels of vitamin D? It's not where your reference ranges on your pathology paper say it is. And in my world, because of the information I get out from people who are well and all the research I do, I wouldn't be happy if my vitamin D was below 90, and it needs to not be any higher than 180. But I think if you recalibrate your vitamin D reference range to be 90 at the very lowest to 180, that's as high as it needs to go, then you're going to lead a longer and healthier life. So that's probably an important take home for your listeners.
Yeah, well, I think that's great, because we have spoken about vitamin D before on the podcast, but only briefly. But it is one of the things. I had a question come through the other day, and I'd done an Instagram live on vitamin D and the importance of vitamin D. And a lot of people believe too, if you live in Australia, you couldn't possibly need vitamin D. And I said, no, that's definitely not the case, especially if you're someone like me that lives in Melbourne. where it gets quite cold in winter and we're indoors more often too. So, again, getting your vitamin D levels checked, on a fairly regular basis, at least a few times a year. In summer, it might be great because you're outdoors and, you're getting that sun, that lovely morning sun that's not high UV. But in winter, we're indoors, it's cold, we're not getting as much of that sunshine. And so, therefore, we're usually not making as much vitamin D either.
Exactly right. One of the things, again, I underestimated how much this vitamin D rich food can help, but mushrooms are really valuable vitamin D food sources. And the Gwinganna chef basically gave us a little hint and said, well, if you put your mushrooms after you buy it out in the sun for an hour before you refrigerate them, that actually allows them to concentrate even more vitamin D for you. So you get a big burst when you actually eat the mushrooms. So if you don't like eating haggis and lamb's brains and kidneys, then maybe mushrooms are a really good choice for your vitamin D food sources.
That's it. And especially for vegetarians, or if you're following a vegan diet too, then, you're not eating eggs and things like that that have vitamin D in all those meat sources. So definitely a fantastic option. Now, before we finish up, where can our listeners reach out and follow and connect with you?
Right. I think I'm more active on Instagram now than anywhere else, but I do have an active Facebook page as well. So at Dr. Karen Coates for Insta, and Dr. Karen Coates on my Facebook page as well. I'm not doing face-to-face anymore, although there is an opportunity to do some genetic wellness investigations and then Zoom connect with me, but that's a very specific opportunity. So I try and share my my knowledge and educate people through either the Insta and Facebook, and through the opportunity to connect on retreats such as the Gwinganna one coming up. And I think I've got a couple of spaces left. I'm going back to Europe next March and I'm taking 6 women with me, and we're basically going to immerse ourselves in a blue zone lifestyle and talk about hormones and health and have fun in Europe. So that's another opportunity to connect for a very special little group of women.
Amazing. Well, that sounds great. I'll link all of that up in the show notes too. So listeners, head on across to the show notes there to reach out and connect with Dr. Karen. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I always love, it's a bit like you, if we can help women in their health, and really rise up, help them rise up, then, it's just part of what my passion and journey is too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you for what you do for women and their movement as well. It's so tops.